We got a huge reaction last week to our segment exposing the lie that intimate partner homicide in Australia was rising. In case you missed it, we showed the data from the Australian Institute of Criminology, which had just come out. It showed a big and steady decline in intimate partner homicide and acquaintance homicide in Australia since 1989. Homicides are classified by the Australian Institute of Criminology into domestic, meaning an intimate partner, a relative or someone living with you, acquaintance, meaning someone you know who's not living with you, and stranger homicide. And this chart shows all three types and the rates of homicide from 1989 on the left to 2023 on the right. The dark green line is the domestic line and the light green line is the acquaintance line, and they've both dropped massively and consistently since '89. The rate of domestic homicide in 2022-23 was 0.3, and the acquaintance homicide rate decreased to 0.24 per 100,000. That's the lowest since 1989, when it was 2.5 times that. As you can see from the grey line at the bottom, the only type of homicide that hasn't dropped is stranger homicide, and the victims of stranger homicide are significantly mostly men. My ADH TV colleague Daisy Cousens has been a long-time champion of men's rights, as has another internationally popular Aussie YouTuber, Sydney Watson. They got together this week for a chat on Daisy's show, Kaleidoscope.
Did you know that men, not women, are more likely to get attacked in public? Did you know that men are also the majority of murder victims, the majority of the homeless, the majority of the drug and alcohol addicted, and also commit suicide at higher rates than women? Well, with our society's hyper-focus on women's issues as the pinnacle of what warrants compassion, you can be forgiven for not knowing any of the aforementioned statistics.
Yep, you could be forgiven for not knowing any of that if you live in Australia and consume nothing but old media. But there's been an awakening going on for almost a decade now called the Red Pill movement. If you're a Gen Xer like me or a boomer, you may not be aware of the movement called the Red Pill movement. The term is a reference to the Matrix movies and the idea that if you take the red pill, you have woken up and are truly awake to the feminist lie of female oppression in the modern liberal Western world.
You take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
The Matrix. Daisy Cousens and Sydney Watson were big supporters in the early days of the Red Pill movement. But there's a dark side to the movement. Internet grifters and trolls, people who make money and get famous by stirring up trouble, a bit like Australian TV news and current affairs. I'm talking about people like the idiotic former kickboxing champion Andrew Tate, whose screwed up idea of masculinity, that it's all about money and muscles and dominating women, is having almost as damaging an effect on young men as the ratbag feminists telling them that their very essence, their masculinity, is toxic.
I was getting on a plane and I could see through the cockpit that a female was the pilot, and I took a picture and I said, most women I know can't even park a car. Why is a woman flying my plane?
Yeah, that's Andrew Tate. Great. This is not what the Red Pill movement was supposed to be about, but Tate has courses to sell to men about becoming more masculine. And he hooks people in by sometimes speaking the truth to people who need some empathy.
I think most women can actually genuinely understand how lonely the majority of men are. Yeah. And you need to truly understand, if you're Joe Schmo, average in nearly every way, in Starbucks working, you ain't getting a DM ever. You girls will never be lonely. As much as you might be unhappy with the possible suitors, there are men out here in the world who have genuine loneliness.
Now, the thing about Tate is, ask any high school teacher, and they'll tell you that there's a group of boys in their class, small maybe, who are into him at a very impressionable age. That video itself has 10 million views. And it's the more empathetic comments like that that have made Tate popular and his courses successful. We should point out he's facing serious criminal charges in Romania over exploiting women to work on the live porn site OnlyFans. This could be part of a campaign to get at him. We'll find out that in due course. But the point is that his world of old-fashioned sexism is simply not the answer. And it's got commentators like Daisy and Sydney a bit worried about where the Red Pill movement has gone.
You and I, we came up around the same time in 2018. That's when you were living in Australia. We were both critiquing modern feminism and defending men. You were wonderfully vocal when it came to men's rights. As I mentioned, you organised the March for Men back when the Red Pill movement was something else entirely. So, Sydney, from your perspective, where did it all go downhill?
When you and I were involved in the conversations around men's rights and men's issues, it was all about highlighting the legitimate problems that men experience as a unique group of people. And now it's kind of become this anti-female, anti-woman-esque movement that's not so much geared around fixing men's problems so much as it is just blaming women for everything.
And Daisy Cousens joins me now. Daisy, thank you for staying back after your show to be with us on the other side. It's great to have you.
Not a problem. Thank you so much for having me. Very glad to be here.
So what struck me about your interview with Sydney Watson was the generation gap. I was thinking, you know, like Gen X and the boomers, my universe, are sort of just becoming red-pilled, and we're saying, hang on a minute, we're sort of realising that what's going on here with the constant demonisation of men in our culture. But you guys are kind of, in Gen Y and Gen Z, seem to be a little bit ahead, and you're on to the next phase of it all, critiquing where the red pill movement is going. Can you just explain for us, Daisy, for us out-of-touch old fuddy-duddies, what we need to know to catch up? What are we missing here?
Well, it's interesting. The red pill movement started out, as all these movements do, as a very, very good movement. It was, as I'm sure you've mentioned, it was named after, Neo taking the red pill in the classic film The Matrix, so his eyes are sort of open and he sees the world as he really is. And it became really popularized around 2016 when the wonderful Cassie Jaye made that extraordinary documentary about the men's rights movement called The Red Pill. And it's interesting, she was a feminist when she made the documentary, and she made it with the intent of, exposing the men's rights movement as this terrible misogynistic thing. But what she found out was that these men's rights activists, one, were not misogynists, and two, were talking about a whole lot of things that were very, very relevant that were negatively affecting men and boys. I mean, mental health is the obvious one. Men are the majority of the alcohol abusers, the majority of drug addicts, the majority of the homeless. There's a lot of difficulties that men face, just as there are women face. We all have our own kind of sex-based issues that are simply not popularized. And so Cassie came around and finishes the documentary by saying, I no longer call myself a feminist, and she became quite involved actually in trying to promote the men's rights movement and help men. So that red pill movement started as an initiative that was really, really good. And certainly when I became interested in it, I wasn't aware of those issues facing men. And I thought, wow, these feminists, these pop culture feminists really do tell terrible lies about men, and there's a whole set of data that we just don't see in popular culture. So as all these things do, it started off really good, and I was very happy to talk about it. I spoke at a men's rights conference. Sydney was very involved as well. She organised the March for Men in 2018, the basis of which was, hey, blokes have their own problems and they deserve empathy and compassion and help in exactly the same way that women do. The problem with this is that, as with all movements, there are factions in there that get involved in it and are a little bit unwholesome. So what's happened with the advent of the internet is that certain influencers have joined the movement. The obvious one is Andrew Tate. And then there's podcasts like the Fresh and Fit podcast. There's another one called the Whatever podcast, which sort of fit in that red pill space, but they're much more about hating on women and making fun of women, and also basically telling men not to get married because, you don't want to risk it because you'll end up paying alimony and all of that kind of stuff. That faction was already there in the kind of MGTOW movement, which is men going their own way. But that was a small niche of MGTOW. That was sort of the troll element that I always said were incels pretending to be MGTOW to justify their own lack of sex appeal. That, unfortunately, infiltrated the movement, and we're in a situation where there are a lot of hostile forces on the internet telling young men and also boys, like children and teenagers, that women are something to be avoided and that they're inherently inferior to men. So,
or they're an object, right? It goes back to that really crass sexism of the past that we don't really want to return to. But by the same token, I mean, here we are sort of 8 years, I think, down the track, and have we really come any way in terms of improving things for men. It's still pretty bad. Yet we've got the young guys getting this sort of not so healthy stuff coming at them online. What do you see as the solution here in terms of getting the balance right again?
Oh, well, honesty. I think honesty in commentary. And the thing about this red pill movement, Damian, is that I understand men being resentful of the feminist pop culture that's pushed on them. I mean, men and boys, particularly white men and boys, get told that every single problem in society is their fault, which is, of course, not true. That's a collectivist sort of opportunistic thing that, you know, women who hate men kind of push. I can understand totally the resentment that a lot of men feel. Older guys, I feel like, you know, they're a bit more sure of themselves and maybe they go, oh, it's just this feminist talking. But think about teenage boys and guys in their early 20s. I mean, what are they supposed to do? They're taught they have to be kind of, you know, tough and manly. At the same time, they're taught that they need to be more emotional. At the same time, they're taught that if they have any kind of sexual desire for a woman, then they're a potential predator and a rapist. I mean, what's a young man to do here? So of course they are attracted to people like Andrew Tate in the absence of any really good male role models. So the solution, I just think that people need to stop lying. Feminists need to stop lying, for one thing. They have to stop with this hostility towards men in popular culture. It's ridiculous. It wouldn't be tolerated about any other group of people. You know, straight white men are the only group in society for which it's politically correct to denigrate them on the basis of race, gender and sexuality. I mean,
well, comedians are saying now that they're the only group left to attack because they're not allowed to attack any other group, so they don't have material for their comedy, unfortunately. But I mean, do you think that you know, the feminist movement is getting any better? I mean, the days of Clementine Ford, the angry screecher. I mean, you had a famous interaction with her on I think it was ABC television several years ago. I mean, she is possibly the face of that sort of horrible type of sexist, misandrous kind of feminism that we see now. I don't get a feeling that that's getting a lot better. It seems to be getting a little bit more extreme. What do you reckon on the ground?
Well, the interesting thing is, and it was actually Sydney Watson who put this to me in an interview I did with her on my YouTube channel a while ago, the trans movement has actually cannibalized the feminist movement. So that kind of man-hating, screechy, what I call female-centric feminism is kind of a thing of the past. So, you know, someone like Clementine Ford, who, you know, made her reputation and her career on, you know, in my opinion, just bashing men, basically, and presenting, you know, data sets that are half-cooked, and, you know,
awful sexism.
Awful sexism against men. She's kind of she and her ilk are kind of straddling this fence at the moment, which is basically one, oh, women are oppressed by men, and two, oh, men who identify as women aren't actually men, and because they feel like women, well, they can of course come into our spaces and everything. So it's this weird roundabout. So if I believed in patriarchy, I would say it's the patriarchy come full circle. Like, men have found a way around feminism, and that is by identifying as women. You know, you couldn't write it, but there it is. So I think that man-hating feminism still exists, but they're in a very strange place where men, or at least males identifying as women, have actually infiltrated the movement. So I think this fourth wave feminism is due to combust relatively soon, because I think a lot more women now are waking up to the fact that, well, you know, trans women exist. There are males out there who have gender dysphoria living in good faith as women. Like, we don't have any problem with that. But there is this unwholesome element to it, and I think it's really going to drive your average woman away from feminists like Clementine Ford, who are trying to kind of please both sides and who will ultimately just end up pleasing no one.
And what do you reckon about the other side of the coin in terms of what will happen to this red pill movement among young men and these negative sort of Andrew Tate type characters? We've seen Jordan Peterson be very critical of Andrew Tate, and rightly so, for all the right reasons. I guess we just need better parenting from both fathers and mothers in terms of guiding kids the right way and keeping that balance right.
I think it's really a matter of parents need to be so involved in their children's internet experience. It's just unbelievable. And that's really hard for parents because the kids are always 4 steps ahead with the technology. You know, you find a way to block their internet, they find a VPN. Like, you know what I mean? That kind of thing. It's very, very hard for parents, but they really do need to be so involved in what their kids, both boys and girls, are consuming on the internet, whether it's, you know, violent pornography that is so pervasive and so easy for them to access, whether it's people like Andrew Tate. He kind of gets around it because he also has a message of, you know, self-improvement for young men, you know, which is thing, but he peppers it with this misogyny, outright misogyny. So your parents just like be involved. Surely there are courses you can do online now that teach you how to manage your children's internet experience. My opinion is we should just ban anyone under 18 from being on social media, or better yet, the entire internet. You know, but I know that's not practical. But yeah,
Please don't say that.
No, well, ban under 18s from social media. I am perfectly comfortable to say that public. Absolutely, get them off. It's not good for them.
Yeah, it's not healthy. I'm fine with that too. I just think that, yeah, we've got to be careful about banning things these days generally with the where the E-Safety Commission is coming from and all sorts of...
different for minors though, Damian, you know?
Different for minors. Well, hey, that's why it was set up, right? It was set up for children, right?
Yeah.
And it's morphed, as all government things do, into this monster where you know, it's being used as a political tool to censor. Yeah, pretty nuts. We could talk about that for ages too, but we better wrap it up. You've got stuff to do. Thank you very much, Daisy. It's great to have you on the show. I hope you can come back on sometime soon.
Love to. Thank you so much for having me, Damian. This has been great fun.
Did you like that content? Well, there's a lot more where that came from. It comes from a show called The Other Side, which we drop a new episode of every Friday night at 8 p.m. to get you across all the news of the week for the weekend. Get you smart for the weekend without the woke. So join us on adh.tv or right here on YouTube. Hit that subscribe button. Watch full episodes here.